Welcome everyone. My name is Roxanne and I'm a grad global impact intern at International House. The mission of International House is to enable students and scholars from around the world to live and learn together in a diverse community that builds lifelong qualities of leadership, respect, and friendship. Founded in 1932 by John D. Rockefeller Jr., International House of Chicago is today one of 20 members of the International Houses Worldwide Network. In addition to supporting the graduate student community through our Graduate Commons program, International House also serves the greater Chicago community as a cultural and intellectual center for a wide array of programs. Close to 100 public programs are held each year at International House through the Global Voices Performing Arts and Lecture Series, and during autumn quarter, we're providing virtual, in-person, and hybrid programming. You can learn more about the different types of events at ihouse.uchicago.edu. The Global Voices Performing Arts and Lecture Series includes outreach programs with Chicago area international organizations, collaborations with foreign consulates, music and cultural performances, and discussions and debates led by distinguished guest speakers, including those for today's program that we are so pleased to co-sponsor with Seminary Co-op Bookstores. All of Mumbai's possessions and memories come to die at the Deonar garbage mountains. Towering at the outskirts of the city, the mountains are covered in a faint smog from trash fires. Over time, as wealth brought Bollywood knockoffs, fast food, and plastics to Mumbaikars, a small forgotten community of migrants and rag pickers came to live at the mountain's edge, making a living by reusing, recycling, and reselling. In a narrative instilled with superstition and magical realism, Sauma Roy crafts a modern parable exploring the consequences of urban overconsumption. A moving testament to the impact of fickle desires, Castaway Mountain reveals that when you own nothing, you know where true value lies, in faith, community, and love. Sauma Roy is a journalist and social entrepreneur from Mumbai. She has written for Outlook magazine, Mint newspaper, and Forbes magazine, among others. She then co-founded Vandana Foundation to support the livelihoods of micro-entrepreneurs. This is how she first met the Wastepickers of Mumbai's Deonar garbage mountains. She stayed on to chronicle their lives for 8 years. Through their stories, she has told a tale of overconsumption, pollution, and climate change. She received fellowships from the Rockefeller Foundation's Bellagio Center, Blue Mountain Center, Carey Institute for Global Good, and Sangam House for writing Castaway Mountain. Anup Malani is the Lee and Brena Freeman Professor at the University of Chicago Law School and a professor at the Pritzker School of Medicine. He is also a research associate at the National Bureau of Economic Research in Boston. He is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and has served on the boards of the Becker-Friedman Institute, the New Bar Collegium, and the University of Chicago Press. Malani was the founding faculty director of the Tata Center for Development at the University of Chicago and is also the co-founder and faculty director of the International Innovation Corps, a social service program that sends teams of U.S. and foreign university graduates to work on innovative development projects with government officials in India and Brazil. Malani conducts research in law and economics, health economics, and development economics. His health economics research focuses on the control of infectious diseases, the value of medical innovation and healthcare insurance, placebo effects, and conflicts of interest in medicine. And he is the principal investigator on the Indian health insurance experiment, an 11,000 household randomized controlled trial of health insurance in Karnataka, India. Following the presentation, there will be an opportunity for questions, so please submit those via the Q&A function. And don't forget, you can purchase Castaway Mountain from Seminary Co-op Bookstores. Now, please welcome Sauma Roy and Anup Malani.
Well, thank you everyone for coming. It is an honor to join this conversation with Saumya on her new book, Castaway Mountain. I found this book to be a gripping story. I don't know if you all have had a chance to read it, but it does an amazing job of capturing the despair amongst individuals living in Deonar and living among the mountains of garbage, of trash, yet making a living. It shows the role that despair plays in poverty traps that you find often in slums and informal settlements. It shows you the frustration that we can't fix this problem due to lack of state capacity, the inability of state, and particularly local governments, to affect change, and in fact the conflicts between them. It shows you the frustration when the only time you see movement for change is when the rich share in the tribulations and the catastrophes that the poor face on a daily basis. And even then, the solutions are often that you see implemented are ones that benefit the rich first, and maybe not the poor at all, if at all, if they benefit at all. I think this is incredibly important work. I am thoroughly amazed by the amount of research that Saumya has done on this, and how she's devoted her efforts not merely to writing about the events at Deonar, but also to take action on it and try to rectify it. So I think that's both it's laudable, it's honorable, and I'm deeply impressed. But with that, I think the way that I would like to start this conversation is to ask Saumya to share excerpts of her book with us, to provide color for the conversation to come. So Saumya, if I can impose on you, could you please give us a little taste of the story that you tell in this book?
Thank you so much for having me here. Thank you to the International House, to Seminary Bookstore, and to you, Dr. Malani. I don't know if my eyes are playing tricks on me, but I feel like Adrienne Leblanc is here, one of my greatest heroes in writing. She wrote Random Family, which is a great narrative nonfiction account of a family in New York, a little bit like the Sheikhs and the that I wrote about. So my deepest gratitude to all of you who are here. Dr. Malani, I followed your work and your research, and most of all your infectious enthusiasm for closing gaps in income, vaccination, disease, skills, and everything that makes life better in cities. My book, unfortunately, is about people who live in policy gaps and the emotional experience of living in that policy gap, that delay, that unending delay. So it's a little bit different, but it's what is that emotional experience of poverty, along with all the sort of documentary research that went into it. But it's really about the experience of living in a policy gap. And I followed so much of your work where you've looked at it from different angles. For instance, your recent study on Mumbai's seroprevalence or antibodies on COVID vaccination, and you found that people in slums had 3 times as many antibodies as those who didn't live in slums. And so it raised the question that who was to be socially distanced from, the wealthy or the poor? And I hope that you'll talk about it a little bit. It's sort of really, I thought, upended social equations in our city for sure. And it would be great if you could talk about that a little bit later. And my book really talks about how deeply rooted these gaps are within people and how steep the climb up and out of them is. The book is obviously set in the garbage dumping grounds of Mumbai. They're more than 300 acres large, 122 years old. All of Mumbai's garbage arrives here and has piled up to make mountains that are tall like 18-floor buildings. The only thing that left here was in the hands of waste pickers who trawl these mountains. I chronicled their lives made of our waste, the unending mirage of getting out of poverty they chased, and the deep imprint that the mountains left within them. The story centers around Farzana Sheikh, who was born at the feet of these mountains, lives there even now, grew up on their slopes, and also the stories about Hyder Ali, her father, who's worked there for 2 decades. I'll read a short passage on Farzana's growing years and the unmoving imprint of the mountains within her. When she was 5, Hyder Ali enrolled Farzana at the municipality's Urdu medium school for girls nearby. Every morning, Farzana walked to school with her sisters, Afsana and Jannat. Every afternoon, the breeze began blowing in from the creek, bringing a whiff of the mountains into their home, and she drew her up the slopes. Standing on trash bags, Farzana breathed in the sea and its unconstricted gusts as she looked out for her other sisters who worked there. Soon the balance fell in favor of the mountains, drawing her increasingly towards them. She and her sisters spent afternoons swimming in the creek and collecting discarded cloth scraps to swell the pile their father made on a mountain edge. Even amid the frenzied scrambles around emptying garbage trucks, Haider Ali walked as if he moved to mellow music playing in his ears through invisible earphones. Khadi mein koi bhuka nahi jata, he had heard other pickers say. No one goes hungry here. The city's growing waste sustained them. This reassurance intensified his laid-back, gangly air. When Haider Ali came to deliver the day's pickings or discarded cloth scraps on the pile he was accumulating on the slopes, it always looked bigger than he had left it. Farzana and the children had grown his cloth pile, helping to keep their household afloat. He couldn't keep them away from the slopes and at school. It was Jahangir, his oldest son, who had never been to school, who fought with Haider Ali to keep his sisters away from the mountains and at school. Jahangir hungrily chased the forgotten fortunes that had eluded his father. The deeper he sank into this giddy mountain addiction, the more Jahangir wanted to keep his sisters away from it. He turned them back from the slopes or to the school whose four-floor building faced the mountains, a fading foil to their sickening allure. But the sisters were back the next afternoon, trailing garbage trucks. Farzana was growing to be all arms and legs, tall and gangly, and what her sisters called an adha dimag, or only half a brain. The rising mountains had leaked into it, they thought. And as the peaks rose higher, rains gushed down harder every monsoon, bringing the water and trash into their home. Farzana fell asleep to the clatter of rain and woke up to see her slippers floating close to her amid unknown objects that had flowed down the slopes along with the water. Blearily, she folded her salwar over her knees and waded through the water to retrieve her books and shoes drifting through the neighboring homes. Then she walked up the squelching slopes away from school. She and her sisters dragged reeking wooden planks, and Jahangir and their brother Alamgir, the third of the 9 children, nailed them to the walls as bunk beds at home and piled their soaking household on it. At night, they clambered on to sleep on the planks amid their belongings while trash-filled waters sloshed below. When the rains paused, Farzana helped her mother throw out the garbage and bring their damp provisions and trash they had stored and that had turned to mush out to catch the sun, peeking in their slim lane. She brought out her water-stained notebooks. Everything she learned had blurred. Trying to catch up was futile. वैसे भी उसके दिमाग में गोबर भरा था. Her friend Yasmin, who was a few years older and lived down the lane, would say. Farzana's mind was filled with mush. I just read a couple of lines about the decades-long municipal and legal attempts to move these mountains and their toxic air away from the city. I watched hundreds of hours of court proceedings where Justice Oak tried to move these unmoving mountains. The case is still on, the mountains unmoved. So I'll read. In July 2020, Justice Oak gave a video talk to law students that I watched. As a young lawyer, he recalled, he only got cases from litigants who could not afford better, cases with little hope of winning. He said, when you connect with such litigants, you learn what life is about. After becoming a judge, I realized the real challenge before our legal system is not that of docket or legal file explosion, but of docket exclusion. He went on, there are certain deficiencies in our legal system that large sections of our population silently suffer injustice. While the unending pile of pending cases clogging Indian courts had often been spoken about, Oak suggested the bigger problem was that people like Farzana and the inhabitants of Karwale, where the Deonar mountains were to move, remained invisible to the courts that decided their fates, even though the mountains were imprinted in them.
Thank you, Saumya. I wanted to ask you about some of the things that I got from those passages and some other ones. The first one I think that immediately comes to mind is, the challenges, and I apologize ahead of time for making this sound more academic than is actually the experience of individuals that you write about and day-to-day existence in slums. It's our way of translating into our language. So I hope you can pardon that. But the first question I had is about social mobility, and there are multiple times in this book where you go back to this choice early on that children face, the choice between going to school on the one hand versus the allure of the mountains. The other example is later on you talk about a young boy whose mom enrolls him in night school, and he's and during the day he's picking scraps from the mountain, but he's so tired when he gets home that as soon as his mom feeds him, he falls asleep and then misses night school. Again, this repeat choice. So I'd love to get your sense of how how widespread this is, how much of a lure this is, and how it causes people to stick with the same profession, whether it's being a rag picker or whatever it happens to be, somebody that shines shoes or runs a local shop or something like that, and that would be a great outcome actually. Or as a daily worker, just that repeat process. And then how the parents navigate that, because it seems that as much as they initially intend to, send their daughters off to school, or go to the madrasa to learn, eventually the need for work, including because of debt, drags them back.
Absolutely right. It is all about social mobility. In India, it's that like cities, they have that golden allure that you could make it. That I think I talk about in the book somewhere. That dream that you're here, you could find a treasure, that you could suddenly get rich, that you could go to. I remember when I would drive down to get to Banjara Gali, like in every Indian city, you must have seen there are always posters of children who went to a tutorial and they got 100% marks in their exam, and now they're doing very well. But when you go to those lanes, you hardly ever meet those children. Most children, actually, this particular ward, when I looked at the data, had the maximum number of municipal schools. Many of them are newly built. I described them, they're freshly painted, etc. And yet it also has the highest dropout rates of any ward in the city. And children are dropping out pretty much in middle school, girls more than boys. And the reason for that is obviously it's sort of many reasons, but one of which is nobody in their first generation learners. Almost all of them are first generation learners. They have nutritional gaps, so many of them are sniffing glue in the stairwells, which I describe in the book. So when they are in school, even they've come hungry, their parents are often indebted, need them to work, as in the case of Haider Ali, he needed his children to work. So while they would pay lip service to the fact that they wanted their children to work, they couldn't actually, to study, they couldn't actually afford to have their children study because they needed the money, they needed them to work. And even if this was a place with unending opportunities to work, because even if you work for a few hours, you would earn something. So you would keep nursing that dream of getting out and studying and doing something, but not actually be able to realize that dream.
Yeah, I mean, in the ethnographic work, so some of the, just a little bit of background to the research that we've done, or that me and my colleagues have done in slums. We've chosen about 27 slums around India in 8 cities to set up field sites to do ethnographic work that proceeded for about 3 to 4 years before COVID hit. It was slowed down during COVID for obvious reasons. But, in that work, we spent a lot of time thinking about social mobility, and, how people changed. And what was interesting about it to us was that there is an awareness in people living in informal settlements of what they need to do, and a kind of a hierarchy where, you maybe at the bottom, you're doing daily labor work. And then if you move up, then maybe what you'll do is you'll have an asset that actually produces output. It's a chicken, a goat, something like that. They understand that asset ownership of that type that's productive is useful. But even then, there's a next step, which is trying to get your children educated so that they might, for example, have a 9-to-5 job, which is extremely valued. And even a step above that is to get a government job where there's also tenure associated with it. There is this hierarchy they know, but it's this is a thing that I think your book does stunningly well, is gets across the gravity that keeps pulling people down, whether it's the immediate need to feed the family, whether it's the need to pay back debts, that despite the best intentions, at some point the parents who have shortened lifespans often need their children to help out before they can make the investment and take that step up the ladder towards a better life. So I mean, it's very it's not a lack of knowledge about where they need to go, but really the friction that they face on the way up, which I think you capture. I wanted to highlight another thing. You didn't talk about it in your excerpts, but I think it was a very good metaphor. So a family in your book, as they're picking trash, discovers the golden necklace, literally a necklace, and their hope is this is going to change anything. It's like a drop of manna from heaven. And that it would change their path. It would enable them to free themselves from the mountain, or then move downstream. Instead of picking stuff off the mountain, you are setting up a shop that might service to other people working the mountain, things like that. But what I found extremely touching is not the word, but and nor is depressing. It's a reality check, which is that you almost have a local resource trap, where you get this wealth, this necklace that has value, and you think, okay, now it starts on a new path. But to start on a new path, I might need to take out new loans to be able to supplement this and start a new business. And then all you've done is just start the cycle again of debt and having to work immediately. And it becomes worse actually once you do that, because if things don't turn out correctly, you actually just find yourself worse off. And I could you share a little bit about more about that? I think people attending would love to hear more.
I think it relates a little bit to, I think that incident was there because it was a great incident, but also a little bit to illustrate my own learnings as a microfinance lender for 7 or 8 years. I was running this organization, and even we live in that hope, right? We're lending to this person and we'll have to do these studies, and we say that, oh, this was the impact and now they're doing much better. Or you live in that hope that, oh, our borrowers, they are now in the middle class, or whatever. But actually the great learning for me was the lives of the poor are so fragile, that actually every time they had a little bit of money, they like, as you know, in India, healthcare is a huge expense. It's a hugely privatized healthcare system. They have these dreams for their children's education, and so we have a hugely privatized educational system now. Over the last few years, there's been almost 20-25% or maybe 30% children have moved from the government system to the private school system, and so all of that is a drain on them. Family expenses, weddings, which I talk about. The minute they have any money, there's something that drags them down, and that money is gone. So actually, with microfinance loans, I wouldn't say that they don't make any difference. They certainly do, but certainly there is a need for. They don't replace the need for a social safety net. They don't replace the need for health insurance or other things that provide that net by which they can actually go on to build assets which they dream to build. As you know, lots of research studies have also shown that microfinance loans help them to get to that next step, or to actually build assets. Maybe there is a need for that microfinance plus kind of an approach, where there is some safety net that they can fall back on, and every time they earn something, it's not just gone in some crisis, or somebody beat up my wife, I need to go to the police station and all my money is gone. I needed an appendix operation, all my money is gone. I needed, say, a secret abortion, all my money is gone, all of which I heard while I was there. So I think it traced a little. Muhammad Ali was a very charismatic character, and at one point I thought the whole book would be about him, because he spoke, he was very articulate. He was full of running 3 or 4 different businesses at any given point of time. He took, successive cycles of loans, and it kept seeming like he would do very well. His children were all in school. He was a very good-looking, very charismatic person, and very smooth speaking. As you know, he said that his father was some sort of a priest, and he could do magic that would cure you of diseases, all kinds of things. And in the end, that debt trap, every time he got something, he had to take a new loan, to keep it going, because he had overspent whatever money he did have because of some crisis or the other. And in the end, he just collapsed so spectacularly that he vanished.
I want to pick up some other threads in both the excerpts that you've read, but also the book generally. Let me just provide one comment and then pick up a thread. One of the interesting things, one of the things that people often ask once they visit a slum and observe the living conditions, which we'll get back to, is why would people stay here? Wouldn't it be better if they go back home? And by home, they mean typically, for many, go back to rural areas. And one of the things that's very interesting about this choice that makes it a very tough one, and I strongly disagree with people that infantilize these individuals and take away their autonomy over their own lives. There is very often a choice. As these individuals will during festival season might visit, not everybody, but at least more recent arrivals will go home to their village to visit during festivals, but come back. They're making a choice. But part of that choice means, on the one hand, perhaps getting a higher income in the city relative to the village, perhaps escaping discrimination, but also an important thing that they lose when they leave the village, which is where their community, long-term ancestral community is, they lose that social safety net. And when they come to the city, they're missing that safety net. And we have not done a very good job. The Indian government has not done a very good job. Local governments have not done a very good job providing that safety net. So I think that's the context behind the argument, or the point that you just made, which is very important. The need for some sort of safety net if we're going to enable these individuals to leave. But I want to pick up on something else that was in your excerpt that was extremely people might have missed, but it's crucial. When Farzana wakes up and because water's running off the mountain from the rains, and there's water in her home, that's certainly true at Deonar, but it's also true in lots of places. During monsoons, often homes will get flooded, and you can actually see that homes anticipate this, because you'll see that when you walk into a home, if you make a door properly, you shouldn't have to jump over a threshold to get into the home. But if you're in a slum, they always have these thresholds in, and the goal is to prevent this flooding from coming in. It doesn't always work, and you hear stories about people sleeping in or amidst flooding inside their home. And this is flooding, just if one were to be crass, that includes detritus from open sewers during monsoons. It's an extremely shocking situation. And I want to talk to you a little bit about that living condition, because you talk about it in the book and how that affects, we talk about despair, but just how that affects your capacity to perform at work, to perform at school, to take care of day-to-day things like cooking. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that and your experiences in this community?
I want just very quickly to talk about the point you raised earlier about social mobility. There's a line in the book where I talk about why they come to the city, and I say that they came here to flee from having nothing. There is a connection between sort of the caste system, religious system, and what are they leaving behind. I agree completely in that there is more of government schemes are very focused for rural development rather than urban development. That urban poverty is, I feel, much less dignified than is rural poverty somehow. Like, you're not living on a railway track, you're not living on a pavement or something. But having said that, those who come here are leaving nothing behind. They don't have assets even where in their villages, etc. To answer the question about the flooding, as it were. This was actually one of my great introductions to this place. Even before I went there, when our borrowers from this place would come, they would bring videos on their phone or whatever they could, or photographs, and show. I remember a very vivid photograph of a child's coloring book floating. They woke up in the morning and they found a child's coloring book floating in the water in their own house, or slippers floating, or food, grains. And it's like a frog in boiling water, because every day is a crisis of some sort. It could be flooding, or it could be, like I talked about, like a local gangster comes and just demolishes your house. It could be the police comes and demolishes the house, the municipality and the police, because even by existing, they are illegal. Just by having that, by being there, they are illegal. And so it could be that the municipality comes and it demolishes the house, then they rebuild it again. So what is their house? It is this great hope, all of them have this tremendous hope of having a house, because that house is so fragile. Anybody can come and just demolish that house, right? And so there was this great act. I would find all of them maintained any kind of paperwork they had that showed that they live here. I got an electricity bill, that anything that showed they were legal, they would accumulate it so safely, keep it in tin boxes so water didn't seep in, because they lived at the edge of legality. They lived at the edge of nature. Every day was a crisis that they would tell you. Either it was flooding, or it was somebody came and demolished it, or it was plastic and the wind blew it away. I have a line where it says that in the monsoon also their houses were walking literally in the wind, which is also a passage. And they learn to live with all of that every day. And so they don't admit it. When you ask them, they say, they talk about ghosts floating in their house, which I've also spoken about. And so every day is a crisis. And they learn to adjust with it every day. And by the end of it, certainly their capacities may be undermined, but they don't know it. When you ask them, they tell you, this is great. There's like unending work, unending money, but they're just adjusting to that trauma within them and not acknowledging it.
Yeah, I walk away from these communities every time thinking that they are so much more strong than I am, that I would not, and with all due respect to all my friends and colleagues, I don't think any of us have the fortitude to handle the sorts of daily crises that they face. It reminds me of a story. One of the communities we worked in is on the east side of Jaipur, along the highway to Delhi, and there's an informal settlement where the city kept on thinking that they were going to build on the land, that there is an informal slum, or there was a kacha slum, and so they would demolish the slum. The people would move away, and then a few months would go by and the city did nothing with the land. So they would come back and they would rebuild, and then the city would demolish and they come back. And this had happened 3 times just during the short few visits that we made to the site. And what's amazing to me is that these are individuals. Just imagine somebody demolishing your home and then you come right back and you rebuild it year after year after year. The amount of mental fortitude that takes is immense. I feel like it gives me a great hope for the human spirit, but also a great deal of sadness that we would do this to these individuals and can't help them. So I want to pick up that thread, because it's a thread that's also in your book. When we think of the police, and I know there's a whole discussion about police in America that is fraught. I want to talk about the discussion among police in India, which is equally fraught, although in different ways. My experience in slums has been that individuals view the police, instead of as protectors, as individuals to be feared, who come and demand bribes because you're living on a land illegally or without full legal authority. And in Deonar, it seems like it's the same way. There's a fear associated with the police, and I think it would be very helpful to the audience to hear from you what the experience is like in Deonar.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's a place that both the municipality and the police forgot about a little bit. First of all, it's not a totally illegal slum. People who, when the dumping grounds were set up, the idea was that waste should be sent from the city to be out of sight at this edge of the city. And then the people that the city considered extraneous were also sent to live there. So they didn't necessarily come as illegal. But when the municipality noticed that there's this settlement, as these settlements do, mushroomed, they were deemed to be illegal. So what I'm saying is that they don't know when they're legal and when they're illegal. When they were sent to live there, they were legal, but now that they seem like an eyesore, they're illegal even there. Although many of them have legal deeds for their houses, for their land, but they are deemed to be illegal. The houses are demolished at any point of time. On the issue of police, certainly they avoid police because both the municipality and the police, this is not a place they want to administer. This is not a place they want to look at. And as you know, so there is this whole trope of writing on Bombay about gangs, right? And this book actually talks about gangs in a very different way, which is that they are again a symptom of policy gaps. That if the municipality were to be running this place properly and the police were to be running this place properly, then maybe there would not be any need for them. But because this is a place that was forgotten by authorities of both kinds, they endlessly in court. Over 20 years, I saw documents saying, are there lights? Are there lights? Are there lights? There are no lights. Is there a boundary wall? Is there a boundary wall? There is no boundary wall. Is there a camera? There isn't a camera. So you can imagine that if you were a 10-year-old on a garbage mountain, what else would you do but seek the protection of gangs? What else would a young gangster do but try to accumulate garbage and fight over it? And it became this somewhat gray zone of legality where they were fighting fiercely. It only brought the despair out, I thought. Not to defend any illegality they may have committed, but that also served to bring out their despair that they were fighting with swords over garbage.
Yeah, it is both understandable and yet disheartening. I want to also highlight some of the complexities that, stepping beyond these lessons that we've sometimes heard before, but hasn't the pictures that haven't been filled in the same way that you fill them in. There are also parts of your book that highlight aspects of slums that I think people neglect, which is the underlying economic ecosystem that develops. You have individuals like the supply of garbage in, the people that are picking this and creating markets and reselling, the resellers, the stalls that are providing services for the people once they make income from picking trash on the mountain. And then also, the debt collectors. And then the people that are informally kind of controlling these areas, including gangs. That entire ecosystem comes out in your book. And I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that. What are the aspects of this entire economy that surprised you? So Saumya, you're frozen to me. I don't know if they're frozen to everybody else or whether I'm frozen.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Go ahead.
Oh, I don't know if I was frozen or you were frozen, but my question was, can you tell us a little bit about your in the book, you give us glimpses into the economy that is built around the trash mountain, which is, the people gather the trash, then there's people that they trade the trash to, who sometimes try to work their way upstream if they can. There's the people that are providing services to individuals living astride the mountain, making money off of it. There's the lenders, Can you tell us a little bit about that complexity? What part of that surprised you the most? Because you know, it is kind of always an undercurrent in the book about that economy, which is very complex.
It might be my own perspective, but when it came to that aspect, I was looking at more at what the city was sending there, and that always surprised me. And I wouldn't say it necessarily delighted me, but I was seeing the city in that. Um, I saw them as skilled workers actually, because there are lots of different kinds of plastic and cloth and paper and glass and metal, and they are separating it very quickly by hand, selling it on to traders. Of course, it's a many layered system, and I spent time in these small trader shops to see how it all gets separated, how it moves on, and they'll always tell you how the plastic gets made into little pellets, which is then sold on to factories, often exported to China, where it's remade into something totally new, like say plastic bottles. I'm told it could be made into jerseys, or those pellets could be used to make packaging, boxing, those kinds of things. I have written a separate article about the import and export of waste that appeared in a newspaper recently. But while researching the book, I was not looking so much at the economy of what happens to trash. I certainly know that once that dirt and segregation, dirt is removed and segregation is done, actually that it acquires a price that could be up to 3 times what the waste picker gets. So they may be earning, say, 10 rupees, 7, 8, 10 rupees a kilo for a kilo of plastic bottles. When they clean it up and they resell it, when the trader sells it on, it could sell for like 35 rupees a kilo. And these prices are obviously highly volatile, etc. But my interest was always in looking at what the city was sending and how it was, impacting their lives. So at one point, it was a lot of cloth scraps that came from tailor shops. But as we began wearing ready-made clothes, cloth scraps shrank. And as we began using more packaged material, plastic began coming there. And certainly, I found a lot of fast fashion. I've talked about ripped jeans arriving there. I found children collecting, hoarding lots of makeup that arrived that we've used, just and thrown away quite quickly. And they would be very carefully applying blush on, very carefully applying lipstick or like purple eyeshadow onto their eyes, trying sneakers, separating the sole. That was great surprise for me. They would have blades and endless, or like knives, broken knives, and separate soles from the uppers of shoes, and the upper parts of sneakers would get squelchy in the rain. That could be thrown away, but the rubber soles are apparently used to make new soles. So soles of shoes apparently have bits of old soles of shoes. So those things always, what the city was sending, and its unending desires, its changing fickle desires, but also how it was reflecting it. That made the mountain a mirror for the city for me.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And it's almost like an archaeology project to understand exactly what's going on in the city and then how it impacts the lives, the lifestyles of individuals in the slum. I want to ask one more question before we turn it over to the audience. I want to touch upon what I found the hardest part of the book to read, at least emotionally, was when Farzana discovers 3 babies. And cradles them and creates a grave for them, and then remembers the event, not solely because she discovered these deceased children, but also because she was scolded for having picked them up. It's very hard for me to convey the emotion of that moment. Can you talk a little bit about it and there's a great deal of symbolism, but amenable to a lot of interpretation. I'd like to hear what you took away from that incident.
Sure. The book opens with that. The book opens with her as a teenager finding dead babies, triplets, amid trash. While picking trash, she finds a glass jar with 3 babies. At first it shocked me when she said it. I was like, I thought was she making it up? So I would say that was one incident that I reported for almost the whole time that I kept reporting, in the sense that I wanted to make sure that I didn't have it wrong. But really it was something that Wastepickers had told me. So many Wastepickers have said, oh, we found dismembered arms and legs and babies, and often boys rather than girls, but also sometimes girls. animal parts. So all of it was not something unique that Farzana had found. It was something many waste pickers have reported finding: unwanted babies being thrown in the trash, arriving there. So it was to show the what arrived from the city, what we think gets discarded and vanishes but doesn't actually vanish, and therefore the imprint of it on the waste pickers' lives, then that leads me to really, that was to me the single most important theme of this book, which is the unspoken trauma of living in a place like this. Like I spent a lot of time obviously talking about the policy, the legal aspect of it, but really, what is the what is the emotional experience of living in a policy gap, that this possesses you, that it stays within you, that it has an emotional impact on you, and that sometimes, when I would ask this, because at first, what is this place like? I remember Adrian is here, and when many of my journalistic colleagues would tell me, maybe not her, but our friend Joanne Drayton, etc., would tell me, oh, you should show how the place stinks, how it smells, how it looks awful, right? But when I spoke to waste, because they would say it was wonderful, that people found gold, people found emeralds, people found diamond dust. As you know, Bombay has a big diamond market, and waste pickers always believed there was diamond dust there. So overtly, they said this was a wonderful place, but they could not. This was, I thought, maybe the way that they articulated the trauma that they underwent of working in a place like this, handling the things that they handled, including medical waste, including animal waste, human limbs, and all of that. They could not articulate it in words saying it stank and it smelled. They would say we were used to it. It didn't smell to us. For us, we didn't feel it smelled. But that it possessed them, that it had an emotional impact beyond what they could say, that it sloshed in their minds, in their bodies, in their dreams, in their, it made them act in certain ways. And her possession really is, a symbol of that, I suppose.
Yeah, I got the sense that they were through many stories, but particularly that one, that there's a sense in which they, despite their conditions, had this hope coexisting with despair. When Farzana discovers that the three babies that were disposed of in an undignified manner by the rest of the city, she gives the three babies a dignified burial. And that I thought was extremely poignant. These are slum dwellers who are redeeming a city that otherwise one wonders about whether they qualify for redemption. So with that, let me open up the discussion to the audience and see if there are any questions for Saumya. Now, I will also request that the host for the session tell us what the best way is for that to be communicated. Can the participants speak, or should they communicate via the chat, or is there a separate Q&A box?
Hi, I think that the participants are not able to speak in the style of this meeting, but we do have a Q&A. If you look at the bottom of the screen for all our participants, there's a Q&A right next to the chat box.
And so I'm monitoring that Q&A, and Roxanne, you can as well, and convey anything. But until that happens, here we go. Saumya, you see the very first question?
I do. Thank you. I'm curious about how the mountains came into your consciousness when you were young, your first memories. Yes. Thank you so much, Philippa, for your question. It's lovely to see you here. I remember, first of all, that the waste pickers came to our office to take loans. We would have different slum dwellers from across the city coming to take loans. And these borrowers were really very different from others because they were earning some money, but you could see poverty was on their person. They had cuts, they had bruises, they were bent, they had bowed legs. So poverty was on their person, although they said that they were earning a certain amount of money, and they were. So that made me immediately curious, because I would ask them that you can only pick what you can with your hands. What are you going to do with our loans? And so Vita Kamble, who was one of the oldest waste pickers in the mountains, she would always tell me, come, I'll show you what an amazing, your loans will never go bad. This is a place never going to run out of work. I'll show you. So my first memories of going with her on a hot summer day, her and her son Nagesh and her grandson, Dr. Malani, you were asking me, there are often 3 generations of waste pickers working there. So they would walk me through this place, and I remember it just by the edge of the sea, in the summer sun, and the place just really mountains. So many people have told me that they were surprised, as I was, that they were really towering mountains. They are like 18-story buildings. We did climb up. Um, I had thought dumping ground would mean a kind of a dumping ground, but it was actually mountains that went up almost 120 feet high. And they're pretty stable actually, because they're layered with mud. So the experience of it is like that. And as you walk up, you see everything the city has discarded: grain sacks, you see foil boxes of food, you see styrofoam cups of coffee, and you look out into the distance and it's all around you. These, mountains made of like grain sacks and bottles of medicine strips that are like just shimmering in the sun, um, diapers, anything that the city has used and discarded is just accumulated and making these mountains. And you're literally up there, you're watching this expanse of, garbage, and the sea beyond. That scene that I described in the first chapter is actually how I first encountered them. I remember speaking to one municipal commissioner who was not wanting to be quoted in the book, and he said the same thing to me. He said, I thought it would be dumping grounds, but they were mountains. वो तो पर्वत थे. And he was totally surprised himself. And that was my experience, just that sea of garbage melting into the sea itself. Adrian, is there anything you had to leave out which you wish that you had been able to include or explore further? Yeah, for gender. I feel that if I had in this book, I talk about it a little bit, but maybe not enough. Uh, because it was her feistiness, her fighting against her gender also that came out. But there were some very telling incidents where, like she says, Jahangir, in order to protect her from working from the garbage mountains, would slash her with his belt. And she said that was a sign of his love. He loved me. मुझे तो वो बहुत चाहता था. He loved me so much. He didn't want me to work on the mountains, and he beat me up, so I didn't go there. And of course, she continued to work there, which is the string that I picked up on. But now that actually she's married, I see her married to Nadeem, and it's come out as a beautiful love story in the section that we took. But now also that they are married, certainly there's a degree of ennui. There's a degree where again he's trying to control her. Her spirit, I would say, somewhat subdued over time. Where now that she's married, certainly there are expectations. Now, for the first time after she got married, as I've written in the book, I see her wearing a burqa, not stepping out of the house. And I didn't want to show that working on the garbage mountains is a wonderful life. Maybe being home certainly provides security, but it also gives control. So I think if I were to write it again, I would talk about gender more than I did.
So while we're waiting, can you also talk a little bit more? Let's take that opportunity to talk a little bit about gender dynamics, but also about family dynamics in this context. You've already alluded to, 3 generations of families working on the mountains, but you've also and you've also talked about you always want to discourage, whether it's your children or daughters in particular, or spouse working on the mountain, but they end up doing that. Can you tell us a little bit more about this this dynamic? And if I can add one more thing, the story of how sometimes women take the lead in some of these households and face the same problems as the men in these households do. I think that's a recurring theme. I think one thing that people don't understand, or I feel that people don't understand about slums, is a lot of these are in some ways female-led households, and that's underappreciated. If you could talk a little bit more about that, I think that would be enriching.
Absolutely. I feel that with that character of Yasmin, where Muharram Ali, where I thought he would do so well, he seemed to be doing so many things and then collapsed so spectacularly. And I must tell you that as a writer, that was emotionally difficult for me to deal with, because I knew him, I was friendly with him as my borrower, but when I would go home and he had vanished, I would see his children. And I sometimes I wondered why his children in the story, like they're not fitting in. Now that the story is about Farzana, why are Muharram Ali's children getting so much attention? But really, the trauma came out through them so much when his daughter, 8-year-old daughter, was stammering, stuttering. It was like the trauma of all that. But then when their mother, I think Yasmin, took over that household and had this tremendous need for her children to go to school. Uh, as you know, she then becomes a subject for medical trials, which she continues to be even after we finish the book. Even currently, she goes as a subject for medical trials, having all kinds of medication, like for, she'll always have this time it was for heart disease, this time for constipation or whatever, like, neurological illnesses, all kinds. She's a professional subject for medical trials. It has taken a toll on her. Most visually, because once she fell on the train station while going to a clinical trial and lost her front teeth, but also because she suffered tuberculosis, chronic anemia. And that to me was one of the most difficult aspects to deal with, that the father had left and the mother was living this life to sustain her children. But even apart from that darkest aspect of it, many households, I did see women just really soldiering through with so many different jobs. Some less dark than this, but certainly to keep their children going, to send them to school, to get them medical help. Like Jahangir has been in jail, as you know, for several years, and his wife is keeping their children going by running. Every few days, I get a phone call from Yasmin or Akila, even now, saying, "Can you help us set us up in business? We need to look after our children. They need to go to school. We don't want their schooling to stop." And they will do anything for it, including put their bodies online.
Yeah, it's a level of sacrifice that's just remarkable. I know we're approaching the end of our time, but I want to ask you about the future, and I want to ask about, where your writing will be taking you next. What are the questions, topics that you're exploring, that you want to explore? We'd love to just share so that we can follow you on this journey.
I mean, this book has just been such a. I left, as you know, I was a journalist. I left writing for several years. When we interacted, also, I was running a nonprofit and not writing actually. And then I wrote this, and so I feel a bit bereft and emptied. So I am writing a few journalistic pieces related to landfills. Like while I was John Logan Fellow, I visited also the Fresh Kills landfill in New York, and then wrote a magazine piece about how landfills can be refurbished, can have a new life, and what the experiences of that around the world were, and that if Fresh Kills could turn into a park as it is going to begin opening next year, then what are the lessons that other landfills can learn from? So I have been writing several pieces like that, and I would certainly want to continue to look at this issue of inequality, and not, you could look at it from the lens of the poor, or you could look at it from the lens of the rich or women. But I think the pandemic has certainly increased. I think we're going to come out of this pandemic as a more unequal society than we ever have been before. More insecurity for the poor probably than there ever has been before, because they have, while the wealthy have gotten wealthier, the poor have gotten poorer, have gotten less security in their lives and their jobs. Women have become less secure, lost jobs at a faster rate than men have. So I think that is certainly going to have an impact on our society, that people like us should be documenting, I feel.
Yeah, I didn't mean to privilege writing, especially after this experience, but I think that there are many of us that would very much appreciate continuing to learn from your experiences, continuing to learn from the stories that you hear. So I do hope that either through writing or through talking or just meeting, we'll be able to see both how the story in Deonar among the Farzana and other families that you interacted with, how they're progressing, but also just how these challenges here interlace with this broader dynamics in India, but also more broadly I think that there are important themes here, and I'm really glad that we had this opportunity to talk about them. And I look forward to what you think about next.
Thank you so much for sharing your research, which has just been invaluable. Over the last few months, I've been seeing all your research on COVID, I've been hearing about the ethnographic study you've been doing in urban slums, and I really look forward to seeing the results of that. I'm sure the pandemic has delayed it, but I really look forward to seeing and learning from that and all your other experiences.
I look forward to sharing.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. And thank you, Dr. Malani. It was an honor to be in your midst today.
Since it is 5, we'll be wrapping up now. Thank you both for speaking with us tonight. It was very eye-opening and interesting, I think, for all of us and those listening. And for everyone listening, don't forget you can purchase a copy of the book at Seminary Co-op Bookstores.